He almost didn't notice the Uber car pull up. Not because it was late, but because it was ordinary. Thomas glanced at his watch, sighed loudly, and muttered, "Unbelievable." The black sedan looked worn out, the kind that told stories of 1,000 miles and 1,000 strangers. The driver stepped out, dark-skinned, calm eyes. Clean shirt, neatly pressed. He smiled politely, opened the door, and said, "Good morning, sir." But Thomas didn't smile back. He hesitated, staring at the driver as though politeness were a foreign language. "Thomas Blake," the driver confirmed, checking the app. "Yeah," he answered coldly, sliding into the back seat. "Let's just go." The city was still waking up, glass towers catching the first rays of dawn. Inside the car, silence hung heavy. Only the hum of the engine and the faint click of a turn signal filled the space. Derrick James adjusted the mirror once, then again, until he could see the man's eyes in reflection. They met for a brief second, one full of suspicion, the other full of quiet endurance. Thomas cleared his throat. "This is your full-time job?" "Yes, sir," Derrick said evenly. "Must be tough, driving people around all day." There was no mockery in his tone yet, just curiosity. But it was the kind of curiosity that bleeds into arrogance. A red light stopped them. Outside, morning sunlight broke through smog, washing over the windshield. Inside, Thomas stared at Derrick's dashboard, a cracked photo of a little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling wide. "Your kid?" Derrick nodded. "Yeah, she keeps me going." Thomas looked away. "Right." Neither man knew that this short, silent ride would ignite a fire across the internet, and the truth behind one of them would change everything. Derrick James never planned to drive for a living. He had once driven ideas, not passengers. Back in college, he was the quiet genius who stayed late in the engineering lab when everyone else went to parties. While others chased grades, he chased possibilities. Machines fascinated him, not because they moved, but because they obeyed. People didn't. His father, a bus mechanic, used to say, "A man's worth isn't in what he drives, it's in what drives him." Those words lived inside Derrick like a compass. Even when the world spun off balance, those words stayed true. After graduation, he had a dream to build a car that could run purely on recycled batteries. He called it Project Renew. For a while it worked. Investors noticed. His prototype even made it to a local tech show. He believed it was the start of something big. He didn't know it was the beginning of his fall. His co-founder, a friend he had trusted like a brother, took the design, sold the patent, and vanished. The betrayal hit harder than bankruptcy. Derrick lost not just money, he lost faith. Within months, the company dissolved. His apartment went up for sale and creditors closed in. He was left with a 10-year-old sedan, a broken laptop, and a 6-year-old dream that refused to die. That dream now sat folded in his glove compartment, a tiny, grease-stained sketch of his first car design. He still touched it sometimes before every ride like a prayer. No one, not even his daughter, knew the significance of that single page. It wasn't hope. It was proof he had once mattered. When life forced him to download the Uber app, he told himself it would be a temporary measure. Just a few months until he gets back on his feet. But months turned to years, and years taught him humility in ways ambition never could. At home, he shared a small apartment with his mother and daughter, Mia. His mother's knees ached, but her spirit never did. She prayed for him every night, not for riches, but for peace. And Mia, his entire world, thought her dad was a superhero. To her, the car wasn't a sign of failure. It was her magic spaceship. Sometimes when she climbed in after school, she'd say, "Daddy, can we fly today?" And he'd smile, whispering, "We already are." That smile hid everything: exhaustion, debt, humiliation. But it also held one thing Thomas Blake would never understand: a dignity no insult could erase. Derrick didn't know how his story would turn out yet. But fate had been watching quietly from the rearview mirror, waiting for the day the world would remember his name, and the little sketch that refused to stay forgotten. The car glided through downtown traffic, the city stretching awake under a pale sky. Inside, silence filled the space like fog, heavy, invisible, uncomfortable. Thomas scrolled through his phone, sighing every few seconds, as if every breath inside this car was a burden. Derrick focused on the road, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, but his heartbeat drummed against the steering wheel. He had met all kinds of passengers, The kind ones, the silent ones, and then there were the ones like Thomas. They didn't just ride the car, they judged the man driving it. "So," Thomas said finally, breaking the silence, "how long have you been doing this?" He said this as if it were a stain that couldn't be washed off. "About 2 years," Derrick replied softly. "Pays the bills," Thomas smirked. "Pays the bills, right. You ever think about doing something more ambitious?" Derrick's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. He smiled, not because he wanted to, but because he'd learned smiles ended conversations faster. "Every day," he said. Thomas chuckled. "I bet." He leaned back, recording a quick video of the city skyline through the window. Then, turning the camera toward Derrick, he whispered into his mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, meet my Uber driver, the future of American innovation." Derrick caught his reflection in the mirror, Thomas's phone pointing at him. "Sir, please don't record me," he said calmly. "Oh, relax," Thomas replied. "It's content. You'll probably get famous." He laughed, tapping the screen. The comment feed began to flash across Thomas's live stream. "LMAO, this guy looks so serious. Bro thinks he's driving a limo. Bet he dropped out of school." Each line was another pinprick. But Derrick didn't respond. He'd seen worse. He'd lived worse. "Where'd you go to school?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Columbia," Derrick answered quietly. Thomas blinked. "Wait, Columbia University, yes?" "Wow," Thomas laughed. "Guess degrees really don't guarantee success, huh?" The words sliced deeper than they should have. He wanted to tell the truth, about Project Renew, about betrayal, but what good would it do? Men like Thomas didn't listen. They performed. The only audience he cared about was the one watching his arrogance online. At the next stoplight, Thomas glanced around. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $1 bill. "Here," he said, waving it mockingly. "Something for your next big idea." He flicked it toward the dashboard, where it fluttered down like an insult. The light turned green, but Derrick didn't move right away. He looked at the dollar, crumpled, careless, then looked ahead again and pressed the gas pedal. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It was heavier, shaped by the collision of shame and dignity. When they reached the airport, Thomas unbuckled his seatbelt and got out of the car. He stood by the open door, still recording, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ladies and gentlemen, 5 stars for effort." He closed the door, walked away, and disappeared into the crowd. For a moment, Derrick just sat there. The dollar bill lay near the radio, reflecting a sliver of sunlight. He picked it up, smoothed it out gently, and slid it into the glove box beside that faded sketch of his dream car. He didn't know it yet, but that same dollar, thrown in mockery, would one day return to him framed in glass, signed not by arrogance but by destiny. Derrick drove in silence long after Thomas had gone. The road stretched ahead, endless, but his thoughts refused to move. Every red light lasted longer than it should have. The car that once felt like his shelter now felt like a cage. He parked by the river that afternoon, the same place he always came to breathe. The skyline shimmered on the water, the reflection of a city that moved too fast to care. He rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and metal. He closed his eyes. For a moment he tried to forget the voice that kept replaying in his head. "Guess degrees don't guarantee success, huh?" His phone buzzed. Notification after notification. He opened it, and there it was. The video. Thomas's smug face filled the screen, laughing, mocking, showing his viewers the face of failure. The comments poured in, thousands of them. Some laughed. Some threw digital stones. A few asked, why humiliate someone just doing his job? But the cruel ones were louder. He scrolled through them anyway. Each word a quiet stab. This guy's probably used to it. Another lazy sob story. He deserves it if he chose this life. He turned off the screen. Silence again. But this time silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, almost suffocating. He rested his head on the steering wheel. In that moment a memory surfaced, the day his father died. He remembered the same rain, the same metallic scent. He'd promised his father at that funeral that he'd never let the world make him small. Now he felt like he'd broken that promise. By evening he forced himself to drive again. Every ride felt like walking on glass. He smiled through insults, nodded through impatience, and thanked people who wouldn't even meet his eyes. When night finally fell, he drove home slower than usual. The lights from the city blurred on the windshield like tears refusing to fall. Mia was waiting at the window when he arrived. She ran out barefoot straight into his arms. "Daddy!" she said, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. He held her tight, longer than usual, as if that single hug was the only proof he still belonged somewhere. His mother looked at him from the door, her face lined with years of quiet strength. "Long day?" he nodded. "Eat something," she said softly. "Even storms can't run on empty." At dinner, Mia giggled, telling school stories, how she drew a rocket and named it Daddy's car. He smiled weakly. Inside, his chest ached, part pride, part pain. After she slept, Derrick sat by the window. The city lights blinked like distant stars. He opened the glove box and took out that sketch. The same drawing he'd made years ago, edges torn, paper fading. He traced the outline of the car with his finger. Every line reminded him of what he'd lost, and what he could still build if he refused to quit. He whispered under his breath, "You're not done yet." Then he pulled out the dollar bill. The insult had become a relic. He stared at it for a long time. Not in anger, but in resolve. One day, he thought, this will mean something else. He didn't know that one day was closer than he imagined. The storm that had humiliated him was quietly shifting, and soon the same internet that laughed would kneel to applaud. Morning came slowly, as if even the sun was hesitant to rise after the night Derrick had lived through. The rain had stopped, but puddles still shimmered across the street, tiny mirrors reflecting a man trying to hold himself together. He brewed coffee in silence. The smell filled the small apartment, mingling with the sound of cartoons playing softly in the living room. Mia sat cross-legged on the couch, hair a mess, face bright with that innocent joy only children carry. When she saw him, she jumped up and ran to him. "Daddy, you're awake!" He smiled, kneeling to her height. "Barely," she giggled. "You have superhero eyes. You don't need sleep." He laughed, the sound cracked but genuine. "Superheroes still need breakfast, little one." She pointed at the kitchen table. "Grandma made pancakes." His mother turned from the stove, her old robe tied around her waist. She had that look, a mix of worry and unconditional faith. "Eat first," she said softly. "The world can wait." Derrick sat down, the warmth of home slowly melting the cold edges of the day that had passed. He poured syrup on the pancakes, watching them soak like miniature suns on a cloudy plate. Mia chatted about her art project. "We had to draw our heroes." "Who did you draw?" Derrick asked. She smiled mischievously. "You," he blinked, surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because you drive people home when they're lost." He froze for a moment. Simple words, small mouth. Big truth. His mother chuckled. "Out of the mouths of children, God still speaks." He smiled but didn't answer. His throat tightened. For the first time in days, he let himself exhale without fear of breaking. After breakfast, he walked Mia to school. The morning air smelled of wet earth and gasoline, the city already buzzing back to life. At the gate, she hugged him again. "Don't forget to smile today, Daddy." He nodded, trying. "I'll try my best. Promise?" "Promise." As she ran inside, her pink backpack bouncing with every step, Derrick stood there longer than usual. He watched her disappear into a sea of laughter and tiny voices. And for a moment it felt like hope had returned. Not loudly, not suddenly, but softly, like the first note of a song after silence. When he walked back to the car, he noticed the sky clearing, sunlight spilling through the clouds. He got in, turned on the ignition, and glanced at the photo taped to the dashboard. Mia's smile stared back at him, not as a memory but as a reason. He whispered under his breath, "Let them say what they want." "I'll keep driving." And for the first time since that cruel video went online, he smiled. Not for the world, but for the tiny pair of eyes that saw a hero where others saw nothing at all. The week passed like a long shadow. Everywhere Derrick went, whispers followed. At gas stations, at coffee shops, even in the school parking lot, people stared, some with pity, some with quiet admiration. He didn't know that the video had exploded. It had jumped from social media to news feeds, then to talk shows. The clip of Thomas mocking his Uber driver had become a mirror for millions. Some saw arrogance, others saw endurance. On the 7th morning, as Derrick prepared for another shift, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. However, something about the timing prompted him to answer. "Mr. James?" "Yes." This is Leah Porter from Channel 7 News. I know this is sudden, but I think people deserve to hear your side of the story. My side? Yes, she said softly. They've only seen the insult. They haven't seen the man. There was silence. Derrick looked at the dollar bill taped beside his dashboard. He thought about Mia, about his mother's quiet prayers. It may be time. That evening, Leah arrived at the apartment with a small camera crew in tow. No studio lights, no fake smiles, just honesty. She asked him questions no one had ever cared to ask. What did you want to be before all this? A builder, he said. What kind of builder? One who makes the impossible move. Leah smiled, confused but intrigued. He walked to a drawer and pulled out an old wrinkled sketch, the blueprint of his dream car. This, he said quietly, was my life once. He told her everything. About Project Renew, about his partner who vanished with the patent, about losing everything but refusing to lose his faith. The camera caught every pause, every blink that carried years of hurt. When the interview aired 2 nights later, the world stopped scrolling. The segment was titled, "The Man Behind the Mockery, the True Story of Derrick James." The story hit like lightning. People who had laughed now cried. Hashtags changed overnight, from Buck's funny driver to respect Derrick. Millions watched his calm, honest words. I drive not because I failed, but because I refused to stop moving. Comment sections filled with apologies, admiration, and shock. Teachers played his clip in classrooms. Motivational pages referred to him as the face of quiet courage. Even corporate executives reached out. One message came from a tech CEO named Elena Pierce, who wrote, "Mr. James, your prototype inspired me years ago. I want to meet you. I think your dream deserves a second chance." Derrick read that message 10 times, hardly believing it was real. The world that had mocked him now wanted to hear his voice. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same phone that once carried insults now carried opportunity. Late that night, he sat on the edge of his bed, phone glowing softly in his hand. His mother peeked from the door. "You're overthinking," she said with a smile. He looked up. "Maybe for the first time people are finally listening." She nodded. "Sometimes God lets the world break you, so when he rebuilds you, everyone can see his work." Derrick smiled faintly. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. Outside, the city lights blinked like stars, and somewhere across that skyline, a stranger's cruel words were turning into the beginning of a miracle. The morning after the interview aired, Derrick woke up to a flood of messages. Hundreds of notifications blinked across his phone. Emails, comments, donations, news requests. His name was everywhere. He had gone from invisible to viral overnight. When he opened the door, 2 reporters were already waiting on the sidewalk. "Mr. James, how does it feel to be an inspiration to millions?" He froze. Inspiration. The word felt foreign. He smiled politely, said, "I'm just trying to make it to work," and slipped into his car. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and nervousness. He drove like always, but the road didn't feel the same. People waved when they recognized him. Some re-recorded him, this time not to mock but to praise. Still, the attention felt heavy. He wasn't used to being seen, not like this. At a red light, his phone buzzed again, this time with a new headline. Was the viral Uber driver's story too perfect to be true? He froze. The article came from a gossip site. It raised questions about whether his backstory was fabricated for fame. They accused the news channel of manipulating emotions for clicks. Screenshots of his old failed startup were twisted into proof. Derrick's chest tightened. He scrolled through the comments. The laughter had returned, but now it was sharper, colder. Another scammer pretending to be a victim. He probably set this up. Nothing's real anymore. He turned the phone off and gripped the steering wheel, the same way he did the day Thomas humiliated him. Only now the world wasn't laughing at him from one phone. Millions laughed at it. That night he sat with his mother. The TV in the background replayed his interview, but now it had become a battlefield of opinions. "She's lying," one host said. "No," another argued, "he's genuine. Look at his eyes." His mother placed her hand on his. "Truth doesn't need everyone's approval," she said. He looked at her, his voice trembling. "But they're turning it into a circus." "Then stay still," she whispered. "Let the noise move around you." He nodded slowly. Stillness wasn't weakness. It was survival. Days passed. The storm didn't fade. Every time hope rose, doubt came crawling behind it. But through the noise, a few voices stayed true. A teacher emailed, "Your story made my students talk about dignity for the first time." A nurse wrote, "I played your interview for a patient who had given up on himself." He smiled again. Those small messages became his shelter. Then came the one that mattered most, went from Elena Pierce. She followed up on her earlier email. "I'm serious about collaborating, Derrick. Please visit our lab. Let's rebuild Project Renew together." He stared at the message for a long time, heart pounding. Could it be real? After everything, the betrayal, the ridicule, the doubt, someone finally wanted to see him for what he was, not what he'd lost. The next morning he took the train instead of driving. He didn't want to be recognized. He sat by the window, watching his reflection blur past concrete walls and graffiti. He thought about his daughter, his mother, that dollar bill, how everything cruel had somehow led him here. When he reached Nova Drive headquarters, the receptionist greeted him with a smile that felt genuine. "Welcome, Mr. James. Ms. Pierce is expecting you." As he walked through the glass doors, his heart raced. The building smelled like new beginnings: steel, coffee, electricity. He passed rows of engineers and designers. On one desk, he saw something that stopped him. A small prototype car, strikingly similar to his old design. He paused, touched the model gently, and felt the ghost of his dream come back to life. Elena appeared behind him, calm and professional. "You built the first one?" she said. "Now let's build it again." For a moment, Derrick couldn't speak. All he managed was a quiet nod, his eyes reflecting both disbelief and gratitude. That night, when he returned home, Mia was already asleep. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "Daddy's dream is waking up again." In the dim light, he looked out the window. The city lights no longer felt like judgment. They felt like applause. He knew more storms would come. But this time he was ready. Because for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just driving through life, he was steering it. The next few weeks passed like chapters written in light. Every morning, Derrick walked through Nova Drive's glass doors, still unsure if he belonged there. The security guard smiled every time. "Morning, Mr. James." That title still felt strange. Mr. James, not driver, not sir, not hey man. He worked late into the night, sketching, testing, building again. His hands rediscover a language they once spoke fluently: creation. Every sound of the lab, the buzz of circuits, the hiss of solder, felt like the heartbeat of something being reborn. Yet even as progress bloomed around him, a small voice inside still whispered doubt. What if this is temporary? What if they forget again? One evening, as the office emptied, Derrick sat alone with his prototype, sleek, simple, and powered by a recycled battery core, just like the dream he had lost years ago. He stared at it under the warm light, his reflection shimmering on its polished surface. Elena stepped in quietly. "You haven't gone home in 2 days," she said, smiling gently. He looked up. "I used to work like this before." Everything fell apart. She sat across from him. "Do you know why I wanted to meet you, Derrick?" He shook his head. "When I was 19, she began. My father's business failed. Everyone left. I remember a janitor who came in one morning and told me, 'Don't cry over what you've lost. Fix what's left.' That line stayed with me for life. And when I watched your interview, I saw that same line in your eyes." Derrick smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's easier to rebuild a machine than a man." Elena nodded. "True, but the man who can rebuild himself, he's unstoppable." Something shifted inside him. He looked back at the car, not as a reminder of failure, but as evidence of survival. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that every insult, every lost opportunity, every silent night had shaped him into something more substantial than success could ever do. Later that night, he retook the train home. He sat by the window, the city flickering by like memories. His phone buzzed, a new message from Mia's teacher. Mia shared in class today that her dad makes cars that help the planet. She said, "My daddy fixes the world when it's broken." He couldn't hold back the smile this time. Tears came quietly, not from sadness but from a quiet kind of pride. When he reached home, his mother was sitting by the window, rosary in hand. "You look different," she said. "Do I?" "Yes," she smiled. Like a man who finally knows who he is. He sat beside her, silence wrapping around them like peace. Outside, thunder rumbled far away. Not a storm, rain returning to a restless sky. He whispered, "Ma, I think I finally understand." Understand what? That sometimes when God closes every door, He's just teaching you how to build your own. She squeezed his hand. And you did. That night he placed the old dollar bill on his work table. He didn't see mockery anymore. He saw movement, progress, purpose. He taped it next to his new blueprint and wrote one line underneath, never. Measure a man by the road he drives. Measure him by the miles he refuses to quit. And in that moment, Derrick James was no longer the man who had been mocked. He was the man who had turned humiliation into heritage. The launch day arrived with the weight of 1,000 yesterdays. Nova Drive's headquarters buzzed like a heartbeat. Reporters, investors, engineers all gathered to witness something historic. Outside, rain clouds hovered low over the city. As if heaven itself wanted to watch, Derrick stood backstage, hands slightly trembling. In front of him, the stage glowed beneath a massive banner, Project Renew, the future of sustainable energy. His mother sat in the front row, a small cross clasped in her hands. Next to her, Mia swung her legs, her pink shoes tapping nervously on the floor. Elena placed a hand on Derrick's shoulder. "You ready?" He smiled faintly. "I've been ready my whole life." I didn't know it. The lights dimmed. Applause filled the hall. Elena stepped up first, introducing the event. Her words were poised, polished, and proud. Then she said the words that silenced the room. "Today you'll meet the man who reminded us that innovation isn't just about technology. It's about perseverance." The spotlight turned. Derrick walked onto the stage. For a second, the noise faded. Only his footsteps echoed. He stood before the audience, the same kind of faces that once turned away from him, now waiting to hear his voice. He took a deep breath. "Good evening," he began softly. "Some of you may know me as the Uber driver from that viral video." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. He smiled. "Yes, that was me. But what most people didn't see was that I wasn't driving away from failure. I was driving towards something. Something I refused to abandon." Behind him, a massive screen lit up. His original sketch, the one drawn years ago on cheap paper, appeared in full color. The audience gasped. Then the prototype rolled out from the shadows, sleek, elegant, alive. "This," Derrick said, voice steady now, "is what happens when you turn humiliation into horsepower." Applause erupted. But he wasn't finished. "I built this car years ago, but it wasn't stolen ideas that broke me. It was losing faith in myself. And faith," he paused, looking straight at the cameras, "is the one fuel no machine can run without." The words struck deep. In that moment, everyone saw not a driver, not a victim, but a man reborn through resilience. In the back row, unnoticed at first, sat a familiar face, Thomas Blake. His once confident eyes now carried the dullness of consequence. His company had crashed after public backlash. The internet had turned on him the same way it once mocked Derrick. He watched silently, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of guilt. When the presentation ended and applause thundered, he stood still as if time refused to move for him. After the show, as people gathered around Derrick, Thomas walked forward slowly. Their eyes met for the first time since that morning in the car. "Derrick," he said quietly, I owe you an apology." Derrick studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "Just learn from it." Thomas's voice cracked. "I lost everything." "Then maybe now," Derrick replied, "you can start earning something real." He didn't say it with anger, only grace. That was the moment the cameras didn't capture, the quiet exchange that turned enemies into witnesses of change. Hours later, the event trended across the globe. Clips of Derrick's speech filled every platform. Faith is the one fuel no machine can run without. It became a quote, a mantra, a movement. Schools printed it on classroom walls. Companies replayed it during leadership seminars. Even journalists who once doubted him called him the man who rewired humanity. Nova Drive's stock soared. But what mattered more was something smaller. A letter Derrick received the next morning from a 16-year-old student. "Sir, I was going to quit engineering. Then I watched your video. Now I want to build something that makes people believe again." He read the letter twice, tears blurring the ink. Then he looked at Mia, sitting beside him with her cereal bowl. "Daddy, are you famous now?" she asked. He smiled. "No, baby. I've just heard." That evening he returned to the garage where it all began. The old workbench still smelled of oil and rust. He placed the framed dollar bill above his new blueprint. Underneath it, the words from years ago are still faintly visible. "Keep going." He closed his eyes, and in that stillness he felt something shift inside. Not pride, not victory, but peace, because at last he understood what his father meant all those years ago. A man's worth isn't in what he drives, it's in what drives him. And as the city lights flickered outside, Derrick realized that he had never really been driving people home. He'd been driving himself toward redemption, toward meaning, toward truth. Weeks passed, but the echo of that night never faded. Derrick James had become a name that meant more than success. It meant second chances. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. But what touched him most weren't the handshakes or interviews. It was the quiet moments when strangers simply smiled and said, "Thank you for reminding us to believe again." He didn't chase fame. He chased meaning. And in chasing meaning, fame followed quietly, respectfully. One afternoon, he walked into Mia's classroom for a career day. The tiny desks, the smell of crayons, the chatter of innocent voices. Everything felt lighter than the world he had once known. The teacher smiled. "Class, this is Mia's dad." Mia jumped up proudly, tugging his hand. "He makes cars that don't hurt the earth," she said. The children clapped wide-eyed. Derrick laughed, embarrassed but happy. He talked to them not about engines or technology, but about kindness and the power of trying again when everyone stops believing. After class, one little boy raised his hand and asked, "Did you ever want to quit?" Derrick knelt, looked the boy in the eye and said, "Every day. But my daughter kept me going." The boy smiled, and for a second, Derrick saw a younger version of himself, curious, hopeful, unstoppable. That evening, he took his mother and Mia for dinner, their first in years. They sat at a small restaurant by the harbor, the lights dancing on the water, soft music floating in the air. His mother looked at him, eyes glistening. "You look at peace," she said. "I think I am," he replied softly. "You've earned it." He shook his head. "No, Ma, I've learned it," she smiled. That proud, quiet smile only mothers have when their prayers are answered. Mia interrupted with her usual brightness. "Daddy, remember when you said one day we'd fly?" He chuckled. "Yeah. Well," she grinned, holding up a folded paper plane, "we can now." He laughed, taking the paper plane and tossing it gently into the air, so it soared across the table, landing near the window. And for a moment, time stood still. That small paper plane carried more meaning than any car he could ever build. It was a flight. It was freedom. It was forgiveness. Later that night, back home, Derrick walked into his study. On the wall hung two frames side by side. In one, the sketch of Project Renew, now a global symbol of perseverance. In the other, the crumpled dollar bill, perfectly preserved. He stared at them both, the symbols of where he began and what he became. They didn't represent pain anymore. They represented process, the long, imperfect road that led him here. He touched the glass gently and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't directed at Thomas or the world. It was to life itself, for testing him, for breaking him, for building him back. The next morning, as he drove Mia to school, the city looked different. Same streets, same buildings, but he saw them differently now. He saw stories in every face, possibilities in every turn. At a red light, he looked into the rearview mirror. For years, that mirror had reflected back to him the weight of survival. Now it reflected a man who was finally free. He glanced at Mia through the mirror. She was humming softly, swinging her legs, oblivious to the world her father had conquered. He smiled. "You know what, kiddo?" "What?" "We really did fly." That night, as the sun melted into gold behind the skyline, Derrick sat by his window. The city is glowing like a promise kept. He opened his notebook and began to write. Not blueprints this time, but words. To everyone who's ever been laughed at, to everyone who's ever been underestimated, keep driving. The road doesn't define you. The destination does. He signed his name at the bottom, not as a CEO, not as a viral symbol, but as a man who had learned that dignity outlives humiliation. Outside, a single paper plane glided down the stairwell, landing beside the framed dollar on his desk. It rested there quietly, one symbol of love, one of redemption. 2 journeys, 1 meaning, he smiled, whispering to himself, everything that broke me, built me better, and in that whisper lived the story's moral, that even the deepest wounds can become the strongest wings. Morning light crept into the city, brushing gold across rooftops and windshields. The world moved as it always did, cars rushing, people chasing, dreams colliding in traffic. But somewhere within that familiar chaos, a black sedan glided quietly down the street, its driver smiling, unhurried, at peace. Derrick James was back where his story began, behind the wheel. But this time he wasn't driving to survive. He was driving to remember. The same streets that once mocked him now seemed to bow in quiet respect. People waved. Some even clapped when they recognized him. He didn't wave back for attention. He nodded. A small, humble gesture that said, I made it and so can you. At a stoplight, he saw a young man standing on the corner, phone in hand, filming the world, hungry for attention. For a moment, Derrick saw his reflection in that boy's restless eyes, the same need to be seen, to prove something. He rolled down the window and called out, Son, make sure what you share builds someone, not breaks them. The boy blinked, surprised. Derrick smiled. The light turned green and the sedan eased forward, vanishing into the pulse of morning. Later that day, he parked by the river again, the same place he'd once sat alone, broken after Thomas's cruelty. But the air felt different now, lighter, kinder. The skyline shimmered on the water like a reflection of grace. He pulled out his phone and opened his old inbox. Hundreds of unread messages from people around the world. Some shared their pain, some their dreams. Some just said thank you. He began replying to one, don't wait for someone to believe in you. Believe loudly enough that the world can't ignore it. He hit send and smiled. That evening, as the sky turned amber, he returned home. Mia ran to the door, waving another paper plane. It was covered in glitter, messy letters scrawled across the wings. She grinned. I wrote something this time. He unfolded it carefully. The words read, For my daddy, who taught me to keep flying. He lifted her in his arms. The sunset spilling through the window, painting them both in gold. In that moment, there were no cameras, no crowds, no noise. Just a man, his daughter, and the quiet rhythm of a life redeemed. He looked outside one last time, at the world that once judged him, now somehow gentler, softer. Then, as if to himself, he whispered, Sometimes the road that breaks you, it's the same road that leads you home. The camera would have faded there on his smile, on the framed dollar, on the paper plane resting beside it. 2 fragile things that somehow learned how to fly, and maybe that's the truth behind every story. That dignity, once awakened, never dies. It just keeps driving, quietly, endlessly, until the world finally notices. Sometimes respect takes flight in unexpected ways.